Good afternoon. This is Kenny here again with Gardening Simplified. I got to thinking today, I was doing a little work trying to get this gate installed here. And I got to thinking, what's the most important tool that you should have if you decide to start homesteading, farming, whatever it is you decide to want to call it. When I grew up, we didn't call it anything, it was just home. Uh, we did gardening, we raised cattle or whatever, but we didn't have a name for it as such. But anyway, that's what this video is going to discuss. I'm working a little bit here on putting in these gates and setting the poles. Now I could set this in concrete, but this is sugar sand, and if I put concrete in it, it's going to give it a little bit bigger area to stabilize better, but it's still going to want to lean whichever way. So I'll just pack it in by itself. You know, on my big single gate, I actually put a crossbar at the bottom, keep it steadied there, and put one at the top. This one, once I get finished, get it installed, I'll put a drop-in crossbar at the top, so keep it from wanting to lean in. The chances if it tries to push out, it would take it a long time. But as far as the top, because the weight of it, and every time you get a rain or moisture, it's going to want to take and lean wherever most of the weight is. Now this here is just a grubbing hole handle. It works real good for packing it in if you pack it in as you go. That's one of the things about when you're a farmer, or I say country folks, we take and make use of whatever. We don't have to have a new tool for everything. A lot of people get into gardening or homesteading or something, and they want the latest, greatest tool, and it kind of defeats the purpose of trying to be self-sufficient and everything else. When you start when you try to be self-sufficient and you're country folk, and that's what I say, country folks and city folks, and that's kind of a joke. One of my neighbors that moved in about 10 years or so back, I'd always call him City Slicker. And of course, unlike a lot of people today, he didn't take offense to it, because most of us, and he's around a little older than me, but we're in an age that we know what joking is. We don't take everything where our feelings on our shirt sleeve. But when we start talking about homesteading and the most important tool, a lot of people don't realize. They get into it, they start getting an idea about it, and they get into it. And it's the same way when I got into raising cattle. I took and did the calculations. We bought this place, which originally started out 152 acres, and we sized it up to 160 acres. And we got up to about 57 head, which for most cattle people, that's not a lot. For a small farm, that's a good amount of cattle. But you can figure in everything. You can figure about what it takes for feed, what the cost is, what your veterinary, what your medical bill is going to be, you know, so you can put all that in and you can calculate. But one thing you don't ever calculate is your time and your labor. And that kind of gets us to the most important tool for homesteading. It's not your labor, which that's not really a tool, but it's that brain that you use to think about it. If you're going to get into it and you're going to want to make a lot of money, say raising cows or say production gardening or something like that, and that's your motive, then what I'm going to say is use that tool and forget about it. Now, I'm not saying it's not an enjoyable thing to garden and live on your own, self-sufficient. Now myself, I don't have any bills. You know, I got a long time ago, which I can't say that. I got electric bills and utility bills and stuff. But I got to where I got tired of paying money to everybody else and decided that just wait a little bit more before I got something. And it's kind of like a lot of things. It's always said, poor folks have poor ways, and I kind of like that saying, because we do things different out here because we try to get by. We don't try to get the best, and we enjoy it. We don't spend all our time on the rat race trying to get ahead. And whenever you get into a situation like this, you might want to pause. And you might want to think, if you have the proper tools to do homesteading, to do farming, to do gardening. Not to say you can't develop the tools, but if you don't have the proper tools, you're not going to succeed at it. Number one tool that you've got to have when you get into something like this is you have to be patient. You know, I see posts, people growing plants, and a lot of them's new gardeners, and I can understand. But when you start, you ought to have a little conception about what you're doing. You know, we have people that they ask questions about, my tomatoes are green. They just seem like they've stayed green forever. Whenever you plant a seed and you buy a pack of seeds, most seeds have a days to harvest on them. Now it's easy enough. It's like anything. You can do things the lazy way, or you can do things the right way. And your outcome is going to be better if you're going to do it the right way. When you plant a seed, if you're going to raise your plants from seed, you want to do it that way. You want to save money or whatever. Then plant that seed and get a piece of paper and write down the date you planted that seed. Because what you're going to end up with is, when you look at that pack, and if you can't remember how long, put that there too. What day you ought to start seeing production off it. Now, it's not always to the point, to the day, but it gives you a rough idea. You know, I planted watermelons last year, and I've always had a hard time pulling off watermelons. I pull them off too early, they start sounding right and everything else. And I've been growing watermelons for a lot of years, but it's always that, you know, it's that anticipation. You want that fresh watermelon. And I don't know if it's a mental thing that I just think it sounds right. You know, the little squiggly end is dried up, next that's close to it. It sounds right. I pull it off and it's not right. You know, it's not even close to ripe. I can't even take a taste and get half the sweetness. Well, last year I grew watermelons, and I wrote the date down that I planted the seed. And I looked at the variety, how many days to harvest. And so whenever it started forming fruit, I wrote down the date that the fruit set, and I waited that many days. And they had showed signs before that, but I waited that many days. And I tapped on one, boy, it sounded good. Well, I went ahead and I pulled it. I cut it open. When I sunk that knife to it, it just popped right open. Sweetest, juiciest watermelon, you know, out of all of them that I've ever picked at the first of the season. And all it took was a little bit of time. You know, you might garden for years, but if you don't pay attention to gardening, or you don't understand gardening, and I've spent a whole lot more time in the past couple of years doing that. There's a lot of people out there that can teach. There's a lot of different ways, and I'm not going to say either one of them's right. But if you don't know these ways, if you don't understand that a seed's going to take this long to germinate, it's going to take this long once it starts to set fruit before that fruit's going to be ripe, and a lot of those things, then don't start gardening. Don't don't start trying to do it. Because unless you have the proper tool to get out there and to do that, then don't start. It's just like anything. You're not going to do algebra if you don't know basically addition and or multiplication and everything else that it's going to take for you to do algebra. You need to know the basics before you get started. You need to understand soil. Now, and that was one of my problems for a lot of years. This year's different. Before, I used to just fertilize my plants just like I'd learned whenever I grew up. But I started getting into it, and I started figuring, well, I'd do some teaching because I like to teach people things. It's just something about sharing knowledge, and not that I want to know everything, but I like to be able to share knowledge. And when you learn the proper way and then you start sharing knowledge, it's good. But there's a lot of times people try to share knowledge and they don't have the knowledge necessary. To homestead, to live on a farm, whether you're raising animals, whether you're just raising vegetables. Here on mine, in '97, we got rid of all the cows. It was too taxing to me. You know, and it's stressful. You watch these cows. You start out, you have calving problems. You lose cows during that process and stuff, and you kind of come attached to a lot of them. I mean, maybe you don't need to. Maybe you need to separate yourself. But a lot of the people at homestead understand that because a lot of their animals they have for years and years, and then one passes. But anyway, cows really tie you down. The garden, you could walk off for it for a few days, but cows, you have to be there every day. You can't walk away from it. Any type of livestock, you just can't. Unless you have somebody that can come in there and take care of things for you, then you're going to have to be there. That means no vacation, no nothing. Gardening, you can walk off for it for a day or two. You might have to play some catch up. But the thing is, the thing is to have the proper tool. You have to have patience. You have to have a work ethic that's totally different from a lot of people nowadays. A lot of young people don't have that drive to say, "Nah, it's hot out here. I'd just soon be sitting inside and it's not my regular job. I could just say, pull up, I'm not going to finish this. I'll just do it another time. Maybe the deer come in this evening." Yeah, because, or maybe you spend some time patching things so you can come back to it tomorrow. But the best thing is to have one of those work ethics that you plan a job, and you don't overplan what you're going to do, but you plan a job to where you can get it finished. And for those of you that follow me, this fence is, I've been talking about this for a while. It's been a couple of months clearing land, cleaning out roots, getting things level, and trying to get it ready for a garden spot. Now, I have plenty enough garden spot. I could grow plenty of food to feed me, but I want a bigger variety. I want to do a little more experimenting on certain crops at certain times of the year, and maybe see what works best so I'll know what to use in the future. And that takes extra time. Well, this little garden spot right now is about a third of an acre, just a hair over a third of an acre. A third of an acre is a lot of area to take care of if you don't set it up properly. Now, when you do field crops, now if I was doing over row, it'd be different, like the farmer. But it's just like right now, this isn't the best for this land, and you got to understand that that's not the best for it to just stay open. But it's a process. What I'm doing is trying to get it prepared, and then I'll come in and set it up like I want it to where it's going to be right. But I've kind of digressed. We'll get back on growing things. We learn things from other people. A lot of people that teach these things, they teach us because that's the way they've learned it. We pass on what we've learned. And a lot of us nowadays, and especially nowadays, and I don't want to go into politics because we'll lose a lot of you there. But you take the time nowadays. You don't do like everybody else and just follow blind. We're not sheep. You see something, you find something, and you listen to it, and you take the time to think about it. You use that important tool, the one that you've got to have, and you think about it. Now, I started thinking about it. I started watching Charles Dowding, and he's over in UK. Now, I'm here in East Texas. I think he's in Zone 8A and I'm in Zone 8B, but even though we're both pretty close, the weather is nothing alike. So you can't take and say, well, he plants this time of year and this. You have to use your brain and you have to adjust schedules, and then you have to decide weather because of your microclimate. Now, here in East Texas, we do get quite a bit of rain. We get anywhere from probably 50, 60 inches a year. It just varies, probably mid 40s to 60, 65. So we get quite a bit of rain, but we get quite a bit of heat. We get all our rain in a short period, and then a lot of times we'll go through a heat period. And you have to plan accordingly. I've never, like this year, I mulched my tomatoes. And I've noticed something totally different about them. Of course, now my tomatoes could be 6, 7 foot high, but I'm not pinching off suckers. So I have a bushier plant. I have a lot more tomatoes than I would have had in a normal year whenever I was pruning my tomatoes. And this comes from another book, and I'll probably share this too, of a guy that just liked tomatoes, and was like a lot of us. But anyway, now I fertilized them a little bit because that was the start of the year. But I've taken and I've started thinking about the microbiology, and a lot of channels out there on YouTube. There's some production gardeners and stuff, and they look more at the soil, and that got to making me think about more at the soil. So what I've done is I've started to shift over to no dig, because the change is to feed the soil and let the soil feed the plant, not try to feed the plant, because you put that fertilizer in there, over a period of time you build up salts and such from the fertilizers. But a lot of the fertilizers too adjust your soil in a way that you wouldn't want it adjusted, whether it make it more acidic or whichever. But you've got to understand your soil. You just can't come in and say, I'm going to garden, and you don't do a soil test, which I can't say that I did. I have in the past, but I haven't recently. But I do check my pH, kind of get an idea on it, and I try to take a rounded approach. Now with this new system, and my recent video on garden updates, you can see how some of my vegetables are doing. My broccoli and cabbage, which are late crops, they're not, for us, we plant those early in the spring and we plant them in the fall because of our heat here. But I've grown broccoli before and I've fertilized it, but my broccoli has never done as well as my broccoli is now, even though there's a good chance it might bolt because of the heat, even though I have a heat resistant type. But what I'm trying to get at is, I didn't fertilize it, not to say. I decided to get compost this year. I laid down compost trying to start a no-dig garden. And I actually laid it over some other compost that I'd made that was more of a mulch type compost. It wasn't all the way decomposed, and everyone says don't use your undecomposed material, but then a lot of them say, well, put it in there like lasagna, layer it. Well, let me tell you, that particular material, it takes and it'll decompose over time, but it won't unless you have soil biology. You have to have microorganisms in there that's going to take and break this down. And they say, well, it's going to take the nitrogen from the soil. Well, the compost I used, I just layered a compost over this, and I planted it deep to where it was just below the compost or partially in the compost. And the compost doesn't set real tight like most composts don't, but it does hold moisture. The bottom layer is going to hold moisture. But anyway, I planted these, and these plants just took off like I've never seen before in a short time. No fertilizer. Now, broccoli's got to, if it's going to grow big old leaves and it's going to grow fast, it has to have nitrogen. Well, everyone tells you that if you have decomposed things in the ground, it's going to take all your nitrogen away. But you have to think about what gets your nutrients to your plant. You can put all the nitrogen in there you want, your plant might get a little bit of it. But unless you have a micro taking care of that soil, then you're not going to have that fertilizer going to that plant. And so, just judging by this, just starting this, and this wasn't the best place in my garden to plant, but just by starting that, and to see how well it's doing, even though we do have rain, but it's spotted. Now I do drip irrigate, so I keep it even because I don't want my tomatoes all splitting because they get dry and then they get too much water. And like I say, that all goes back to that one important tool. And I can't stress that enough. If you're going to get into this, and it's not too late. A lot of plants you can plant right now. I've got tomatoes that are this tall. You know, I have a long growing season. I'm sure you in the north can't do that. I have some earlier videos on planting seeds, tomatoes, peppers. I try to give you a time period about how long stuff takes. So if you are in a different climate, you know, you're in a different zone, maybe you're way up in zone 5 or 4 or something, you can understand how long this takes if you're going to get a plant ready. A lot of people plant their plants so early that their plant is so big by the time it goes out that it really gets culture shock going into the ground. You know, it's different if you're growing in container and you can move these in and out in the cold, then they're in their environment. But when you get a plant and you grow it to, my tomatoes were about a foot tall. They were in 2.5 inch square pots, about yay tall. I had up potted them once because I grew the seeds in separate cells. Well, some of them I didn't grow in separate cells. Some of them I grew 20 seeds in one little 1.5 inch cell, and separated them out and planted them. But understand, don't get in too big a rush. Patience, and understand what it's going to take, what affects them. Because I've learned more. Like I say, this year I used to just go buy my plants, put them out, but I said, no, I want to be more self-sufficient. A lot of you want to be that way. And it was probably good because the way that the economy and the shutdown and everything is going in a lot of states were closing off where you couldn't go to garden centers and nurseries and stuff. And I've got my own opinion on that. You know, that wasn't essential. And we all know with the economy that food production has changed. You know, the source of food has changed. A lot of people can't understand why the store shelves are empty. They say, oh, everybody's hoarding it up. You know, use your brain. Everybody's not hoarding up everything. I mean, there's probably a few that are. But when everybody's going to restaurants, well, not everybody, but a big part of the population is going to restaurants, whether they're going for lunch or whether they go out in the evening, or a lot of people, that's just where they eat out all the time. When they start having to buy their own food, that puts a bigger demand on your markets, and your food chain changes. Restaurant delivery chain isn't set up to deliver to stores. Now, some of you might have heard this on the media, but they don't cover this very well. It's kind of like toilet paper. You know, I have a simple theory on toilet paper. Now, some people, whenever they started seeing it was running low, they started hoarding it up. You know, you always have those people that try to take advantage of a situation, just like some of our politics. But what happens is, it's the same thing. Most people go to work every day. If they go to the bathroom, they go to the bathroom at work. They use toilet paper at work. Toilet paper at work normally comes in big rolls. You know, now these people that aren't working because they're shelter in place orders, that's everything shut down. So they're having to buy toilet paper for their house, which they normally wouldn't use so much. I mean, they do use toilet paper, but it's having to go from a different source. And you can't take that industrial chain and swap it around to go to stores. I mean, how many of you can take a 10-inch roll of toilet paper and put on your toilet paper roll? So what's happened is all that was made for one to be sourced one way is not. So that's what's causing a big part of the problem. But it doesn't help when people come in and start hoarding because they get fearful of it. But everything that happens in life is easy to deal with if you take the time to think about it. First thing is patience. Second thing is a strong work ethic. I mean, it's not like I'm going to say, well, I'm going to sleep until 10. I'm retired. I mean, I don't have to get up. And I'm sure I could probably get by without gardening, but I've adjusted my life to where that's what I enjoy doing, and that's the way that I live. There's government legislation that passed 4 or 5 years ago that's talking about if you stored up over so many days or weeks worth of food that you was considered possibly a terrorist. You know? And whenever I heard about that and looked into it, I said, this is silly. It was in one of these egg bills and stuff that went through. It's just something that, and people don't really think about this, but it was somebody that was into it, and they started talking about it, and then I got checking on it and start to find out this is true, but you don't hear anything about it. Well, you know, all of us on a farm, from my grandparents, which aren't alive anymore, but on up, we would all be considered terrorists. I would be considered terrorist. I pickled up enough pickles last year to last me for probably 3 years. You know, green beans at least 2 or more. You know, that's the way we do. We grow a bunch, and when I do that, a lot of times it's so I can take it easy the next year, or maybe I want to grow a different crop next year, so I don't want that crop in there. It's one of those things that you have to consider whenever you do this. You can't grow tons of lettuce because you like lettuce, but you can't store it. You have to think about what you put in a garden. You know, you can plant a bunch of summer squash because there's different ways that you can process it. And when I say process, it's not a bad thing because like us, we cut it up, blanch it, and then we vacuum pack it. So we freeze it. We keep our freezer to -10, which at that rate, and that's even where I keep my seeds in, it keeps everything in a stage to where it keeps a whole lot longer. It's not like it's vacuum packed. There's no air. It's going to be there when I want it, whether it's this year or 3 or 4. In fact, sometimes I don't rotate or clean out, and I get down in there and I found some blueberries that were probably 8 years old. Well, I took them out, I juiced them up, made some jelly, and it was just tastes like it was I'd picked them that year, you know, because they were vacuum packed and they were kept at that temperature. But it goes back to use your brain. Take the time to understand, and don't just when one person tells you a certain way, don't think that that's the gospel. Because a lot of people repeat things as they do it. A lot of people in canon methods, they talk about how it's always been done. If you're going to stray from how it's always been done, do a little bit of it and see if that works. But we need a society nowadays, and it sounds like I'm preaching, but we need a society nowadays that actually starts thinking again. Our educational system, and I blame that a lot on the West Coast, that they don't teach our kids to think for themselves anymore, and that's why they don't want a lot of they don't really approach homeschooling in the same way, is because in homeschooling you can put your views on the kids. You're spending your time there, and they grow up with your values. When you get your kids into a lot of these other schools, they put their values on them, and then in turn, once you get out and you have kids, their values start changing. It's like Common Core math, which is one of those things. You're going to do it this way. No, you can do it. No, they say it's got to be done this way. You know, the problem is that makes us have a group of society that are not individuals anymore. We don't think for ourselves. We don't do things for ourselves. And here I go regressing again. But if you're going to get into homesteading, if you want to call it homesteading, you want to call it farming, you want to call it whatever. Here in the South, we grew up, it was just home. We had a garden. This is a garden. I work a garden, so I guess I'm a gardener, but I'm not really a gardener. But the most important thing, anytime you start getting into this, is using that main tool and getting the skills. And you understand why it's easy for us to do things like this. My wife used to make a living welding. She was a certified welder. And so whenever I was a satisfied welder. So when I want a good weld, I get her out. If I want something that'll get me by, I might do it. But normally my wife does all the welding now, because she's the one that has the best skills. I don't have to spend my time. I'm good at fitting things. I'm good at designing things. But I don't have the patience to weld. As you can see, I sweat a lot, so my hood fogs up and stuff. But think about a lot of the skills that you need if you're going to get into this. Don't halfway think through it, and then you get in and you're like a business that fails because it wasn't properly prepared for it. Because a lot of people, I know, they're jumping in full bore to do this, and I think that it's an important thing that people get back to understanding where their food comes from, have more pesticide-free food, and have a healthier population, because we're not eating a lot of these chemicals, or we're not eating a lot of this GMO food that's taking so many things out that's probably not good for us at all. Take the time to learn. And I'm going to say, gardening, take a different look at it. In fact, I'm going to do a few patches next year. I don't know, I might do some fall crops too. But to show the difference, Charles Dowden has a lot of, his channel has a lot of different videos, but he has some to where he's got a test section of his garden where he does no dig, no till, versus your standard till and plant garden. And you can see the difference in them. And understanding how he does it, people would say you'd wear out your soil, but he replants the same crops in the same area, and he never has a problem. Now, I'm going to say if he was planting corn, it might be a different story, because corn is a heavy feeder. You know, and I don't know how it would respond afterwards, but that's something I'm going to find out. But if you think this video might help somebody, you know, or if you like it, let YouTube go ahead and bump it up. Take and share it if you think that the content will help someone else, and that helps my channel. And if you want to see more videos on gardening and such as that, homesteading, which I said homesteading in one of my videos, but I can't go to saying this is homestead. This is just home. But subscribe and hit the bell button so you'll be notified. Thanks for watching.